I used to have this hang-up, call it a holiness hang-up. Have you ever had a holiness hang-up? What do I mean? Okay, let me tell you a story. I was dating a girl. Not recently, don't worry. She was over at my parents' house. It was Good Friday before Easter. Now, for Catholics, it's tradition or custom to fast from Good Friday through to the Easter Vigil on Saturday evening. And this particular time, I decided that I was going to go extreme. All right? I was going to fast for 36 hours until the Easter Vigil. Why? Well, because I had a holiness hang-up. You see, I thought holiness meant doing extreme things, like fasting on bread and water for 36 hours. See, I was raised on a diet of stories about saints, men and women who did like these heroic, incredible, almost superhuman feats of self-denial. And so I thought if I wanted to be holy like them, I too had to do things that were extreme. Okay? That was my holiness hang-up. Now, we were sitting, me and my girlfriend, we're sitting in the living room. We're watching a movie. Maybe it was The Hunger Games. I don't know. That would be fitting. But I was sitting there, and I was so holy at this point, let me tell you. I was glowing. You could practically see the halo over my head. And we were watching The Hunger Games, and I was trying to ignore the hunger pains inside. And she was trying to talk to me. And I was trying to watch the movie, and she was trying to talk to me, and I was trying to watch the movie, and then I just snapped. I blew a gasket. I lost it, and I got so upset at her. I was hangry. You know what I'm talking about? You're angry because you're hungry. That's what happened. So much for holiness, right? You see, I acted not out of holiness. I acted out of crankiness. You see, my holiness hang-up was thinking that by doing extreme things, it would make me holy. But they only made me selfish and cranky. Now, do you have any holiness hang-ups? Things that you thought would make you holy, or ideas or conceptions about holiness that may not necessarily be true? I'll give you an example of some holiness hang-ups. Here's a common one. We think holiness is only for a dedicated class, like professionals like monks and nuns and priests like Father Simon. I mean, if you've known us for any length of time, you'll know that's not really true. But we think that somehow, like ordinary people, no, they can't be holy. Like they're too busy doing ordinary things, like going to work and doing the dishes and raising kids and watching The Office. Like, no, holiness is for certain people. Now that's a holiness hang-up. Maybe another holiness hang-up, maybe like me, you thought that you had to do extreme things. And only by doing extreme things that you maybe have no time for, or the energy for, or have no desire to do, those are the things that would make you holy. Maybe another holiness hang-up is that holiness is boring. Like, why would anyone want to be holy? It's like saints are those perfect plastic statues that just stand around all day. They're sinless. They're perfect. I came up with this logical syllogism to describe the heart of it. Sin is fun. Saints don't sin. Therefore, saints are boring. Right? That's a holiness hang-up, that we think that sins are perfect and sinless and boring. Holiness hang-up. Now, there's probably other holiness hang-ups as well that maybe you can add to that list. And yet, we know that holiness isn't just for some people, and it's not boring, it's for every single person. That's why we're in this series called Set Apart. We want to talk about what holiness is, what it means, and how we can live lives that are holy. Now, Father Simon taught us last week that humanity, apart from all material creation, we alone bear the image and likeness of God. The God who is all holy. And so by virtue of who we are holy. And yet, we can't just stop there. St. John Paul II said, this gift of holiness that we've been given, in turn, becomes a task which must shape the whole of Christian life. Now, this task to which you and I are called, whether you're married or single, a nun or a priest, a teenager or a parent, all of us, no matter who we are called to this universal call, as Father Simon put it, to holiness. Universal call to holiness. Now, we all have holiness hang-ups. And so the question I want to look at today is, what is it that holiness really hangs on? Well, in the gospel today, we see the Pharisees, and the Pharisees, they have a holiness hang-up, let me tell you. But first, who are the Pharisees? What are they? Well, the Pharisees, they're a sect within Judaism. And there are what we would call a holiness movement. See, they were a movement within Judaism that sought to restore to the center of Jewish cultural and religious life all the 613 laws of Moses. And they believed that by following all the laws, it would make them holy. Guys, let's get holiness back at the center of things by following the law. That was sort of their project. And so the Pharisees, they approached Jesus, and they're teachers of the law. And they come to Jesus, and they're kind of testing him. They don't believe in him. They're a little bit concerned by him because he's developing a gathering of people, which is a challenge to their own authority in many ways. And so they approach Jesus, and they ask him an almost impossible question. And they ask him this question. They say, "Teacher, which commandment in the law is the greatest?" Now, this is almost an impossible question because none of them would have been able to answer that question. There's so many different opinions on this topic. Some people believe that all 613 laws were equivalent. Others thought there was some kind of hierarchy to them, but nobody could come to agreement on what was most important. So they were asking Jesus what the most important commandment was. And Jesus answers, "You shall love the Lord your God with all your heart and with all your soul and with all your mind." In other words, your whole life must be shaped by the love of God. Every action, every thought, everything we do must be directed towards the love of God. And then he continues. He says, "This is the first and the greatest commandment," but then he adds to it, "and a second is like it. You shall love your neighbor as yourself." You shall love your neighbor as yourself. And then he wraps it all up with a bow. And he says, "On these two commandments hang all the law and the prophets." It's like he's saying, you guys, you Pharisees, you're so hung up on the law. But you've got to get hung up on love. See, holiness hangs on love. Holiness hangs on love. I want to type that into the comments right now. Type that into the chat. Say it out loud. Holiness hangs on love. Holiness hangs on love. That's what holiness hangs up, not on extreme acts. Holiness hangs on love. Very simple. Love of God, love of neighbor. Now, Jesus isn't saying that somehow the law doesn't matter. And he's not saying that we can just, discard the law. He's not saying don't live by the law. He's not saying that love and the law contradict. But he's saying that the inner purpose, the very meaning, the fulfillment of the law, all of it is for the sake of love. Love of God and love of neighbor. That's it. And the point is that when we grow in holiness, to grow in holiness is to grow in love. When we grow in love, we grow and holiness. Holiness, the very principle, the concept, it hangs on love, not the law. Now, that sounds really sweet, doesn't it? We just have to love more, guys. That's so sweet, so beautiful. It's like, it's not, but what Jesus is saying here is very concrete and specific. He's not saying yeah, bro, you gotta put out more positive vibes. Out into the universe, man, it's totally tubular. He's not saying love is some kind of romantic feeling inside. No, he's very specific. He uses the word agape. So what is love? Makes me think of that song by Hathaway, What is love? Baby, don't hurt me. Don't hurt me. Okay, sorry, maybe the guys can auto-tune me, I hope. What is love? Love is agape. It is self-sacrificial, self-emptying love. It's very specific. Now, I'll share with you a story of what I mean by that, to kind of fill it out, right? If holiness hangs on love, we need to know what love means. So here's a story about holiness hung on love. Now, in July 1941, in Auschwitz concentration camp, during World War II, which was one of the most godless places on earth, it was reported that a prisoner had tried to escape, had in fact escaped. Now, the policy or protocol at Auschwitz in that time was to select 10 men at random and starve them to death. One man escapes, so 10 men must die. And so the commander of the barracks, they lined up all of the prisoners and walked by and picked 10 men at random. And one man he picked is named Franciszek Gajowniczek. Now, when Franciszek Gajowniczek got picked and he stepped forward, he began to weep. And he cried out, "My poor wife and children." See, his thought was for his family and how they would receive the news that he was going to be put to death. And at that moment, another prisoner stepped out of line and stepped forward to the astonished onlookers, which is unheard of because no prisoners ever stepped out of line at Auschwitz. And this onlooker said, "I will die in his place." This is the man, Maximilian Kolbe. Now the commander, surprised, asked, "Well, who are you?" To which Maximilian Kolbe responded, "I am a Catholic priest." Now the commander was happy to accept the requests of this prisoner and rid the world of another Catholic priest. And so he sent Max and 9 other prisoners to the starvation bunker where they would be deprived of water and food until they died. Now, one of the guards who was posted to watch over the starvation bunker reported that songs and prayers rose continuously from that underground bunker until they ran out of strength and they became too weak, and then their prayers turned to whispers. See, with their dying strength, they were crying and praying out to God, fulfilling that first commandment to love God. Now, Father Max was always seen kneeling or standing and encouraging the other prisoners, loving God and loving neighbor. Now, Father Maximilian, he outlived all the other prisoners, and after 2 weeks without food or water, all the others had died, but he still lived, and so the guards decided that he had lived long enough, and they executed him by lethal injection, and he died. Now, 41 years later, Franciszek Gajowniczek was standing in St. Peter's Square with Pope John Paul II as Maximilian Kolbe was declared a saint of the Universal Church. You see, the church recognized in St. Max a holiness that flowed from the love of God into his life and through him into his neighbor. And he was moved to imitate that ultimate act of self-sacrifice of Jesus. and lay down his life. See, his whole life hung on love. And Jesus says this is the greatest commandment, to love God, and the second is like it, to love your neighbor. And that's selfless, self-sacrificial love. St. Max is, I think, a powerful example of holiness hung on love. And I know that example. That example is extreme, right? And you're thinking, yeah, that's amazing, like super inspiring, but how can that be for me in my life? Now, I just wanted to paint the picture of what self-sacrifice it looks like. Like, very few of us will ever be called to lay down our life literally for another, but all of us are called to be St. Max in the ordinary circumstances of our lives. Every one of us is called to sacrifice ourselves for the people in our lives, the people that have been entrusted to us, the people that we're surrounded by. See, holiness hangs on love, but it hangs on love in often ordinary circumstances. See, holiness for us today often means not turning our head away from the person who's asking for money at the side of the road, and instead looking them in the eyes and giving them a smile, maybe stopping and having a human conversation with them. Holiness today means reaching out to our elderly neighbor down the street to ask them if they need help with yard work. Holiness today means changing the diapers for the 10th time today, and not doing it just out of obligation, not doing it with resentment, but doing it out of love. Holiness today means being that person who, recognizing that their coworker is having a tough time, sits down at a sacrifice to their own time and project to ask them how they're doing and to listen deeply and authentically. Holiness today means coming home at the end of a long, hard day of work, and instead of cracking open the carton of mint chocolate chip ice cream and eating it while watching Netflix, having a moment to sit down in the presence of God and just offer the day to Him. St. Teresa said, "Not all of us can do great things, but all of us can do small things with great love." See, when I was with my girlfriend fasting before Easter, I was trying to do a great thing with no love. And how much more beneficial for my soul it would have been just to give up a little something, but with great love in my heart for God and for others. And so we might ask ourselves that as we go through the day, as we go through the week, every single day, Lord, where are the moments in my day you are calling me to love you and love the people around you? What's one concrete thing I can do every day, is filled with opportunities to fulfill this commandment to love God and love others? And that pathway of holiness is open to all of us. The French writer and poet Léon Blois, he wrote, "The only real sadness, the only real failure, the only great tragedy in life is not to become a saint." You see, this is our task. This is our call to be holy, to be saints. And in a world full of hang-ups, okay, the world it's hung up on success, it's hung up on sex, it's hung up on COVID, it's hung up on politics and polarization. There's war and conflict and trafficking and racism and evil. The world desperately needs examples of men and women who answer this call to holiness and hang their whole lives on love. The world is desperate for you. And this is possible. It's possible for each and every one of us to hang our whole lives on love. Because there has been a love poured into our hearts from the God who first hung His whole life for us on the cross. You see, that is what love and holiness looks like. And that is a love that has changed the world. That love that flowed from the cross into the life of St. Maximilian lives in you, in each of us. And we can change the world if we hang our whole lives on love.